Okay, we're beginning our review inside of Tzaddik Beis. Tzaddik Beis is a very hefty siman, and it has really three sugyas that branch off into more. The first sugya, the first section, is on milk that falls into meat and meat that falls into milk, and that lends itself to the question of Hanan. When do I apply the principle that the item itself becomes a source of prohibition rather than just absorbing prohibition? That is section one. Section two is when milk falls onto the outside of a pot. What's the law there? And is that considered connected to that which is in the pot? When yes, when not? That's another section, which also lends itself to Hanan, because the flavoring that was in the pot previously could become Hanan itself. So it also lends itself to that subject, which then lends itself in the Ramah to the question of Iroi, which is when you're pouring out of one source from a Kedushin or Kisheni onto something else, onto the ground, and something else goes on top of it. That lends itself to that sugya. And then finally, very briefly, we touched the laws of Zeya, of steam, and how they interact. Those are the three sections of Tzaddik Beis. So let's begin. Siman Tzaddik Beis, chapter 92, Dinei im Nofal Chalav L'Kader Shabasar. What's the law of milk that falls into a pot of meat? That's officially the title of this section. Uboy Tesifim, and this includes 9 subsections, paragraphs. Aleph, Kazayas Basar, a
Mistake. It says 8.
I was just going to say that.
can add to the list of mistakes.
It's 9. That was 9.
Yeah. Unless this is a mistake, which would be unlikely.
So it's testing.
It's test. Yeah, it's definitely test. Okay.
Part of the test.
Right.
Test.
We can make edits and then give it back to them for the next build.
We started out anyway. You can do that if you'd like, yeah. Okay. By test sifim, there's 9 sifim. Kazayas basar, a piece of meat, right? It doesn't have to be actually a kazayas, it's any piece of meat. Shenofel yoda shel chalav reiteach, that falls into a pot of milk that is scalding hot. Toyim hagoya kadera. Again, the principle here is tam ki'ikr. The principle is that wherever the flavor diffuses, it's as if the item is there itself. So the primary goal here is to determine whether or not the milk has any flavor of milk, because if it does, it's prohibited. How could a Jew test it? You can't. Because if it turns out that there's a flavor of meat, then you ate basar b'chalav. So what do? You ask a non-Jew to taste the milk for you. And the laws of that will come in later, Siman. Exactly how and when you trust the non-Jew. That's in Siman Tzaddik Ches, which will come up. But nonetheless, the guy tastes the pot of milk. Im Omar, if the guy says tam basa, that the milk has any flavor of meat, sort of the whole thing is prohibited. Because tam ki'ikr, the flavor is like the thing is there itself. So wherever the flavor of meat is there, it's as if the meat is there, and therefore it is a mixture of milk and meat and prohibited biblically, because it's a boiling pot of milk. So it's full cooking, daraisa. Right? Then lav, if the non-Jew says, I don't taste any meat, mutaretz, it's prohibited. Afilu b'pachas mishishim, even if there's less than 60 to the ratio in the milk to the ratio of the meat. Because as you mentioned, 60 is not a magic number. 60 is just the number that the sages have determined would cancel the flavor of the milk or cancel the flavor of the meat. And in this case, you don't need the 60 to do that because the guy told you already that there's no flavor of meat.
Why are we trusting a goy to give us the flavor? He's used to eating.
Okay, that's going to come in Siman Tzaddik Ches. The details of why and how we trust a non-Jew. There's a bunch of conditions. But if all those conditions are met, then we know we trust them.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming in Tzaddik Ches. But good question. But that piece of meat itself, which fell into the milk, asura is prohibited. Why would that be? Well, obviously, because there's much more than 60% of the ratio, and you taste that meat, you're definitely going to taste milk in it, because it absorbs some of that milk. Okay. The medvar mamorim, when is it true that you can rely on the non-Jew? When you've quickly removed the piece of meat, before the meat itself will exfoliate the very milk that it absorbed. Because
then it's going to be
the milk itself is absorbed in the meat. It itself, the milk that's inside the meat, becomes prohibited because it's now a mixture of milk and meat. And then it's mixed back into the rest of the milk. That milk would not be distinguishable by taste. It's min b'minoi. It's one item in its own kind, and you cannot distinguish it by taste. So even if the non-Jew can taste it from taste till tomorrow, he's just going to taste milk. And it doesn't tell you that part of this milk is really mixed milk and meat, because it was in the meat and then came out of the meat. And therefore, you cannot rely on the non-Jew. Now, at which point does this happen? At which point do I say that the milk that the meat absorbed starts to diffuse? This is that is only until the point where the pot starts to cool down. Once the pot starts to cool down, and the meat is no longer being compelled to take milk inside, whilst the pot is boiling and still hot, the meat is being compelled to absorb milk. So it is not exfoliating that milk. It's not diffusing the milk. But once it starts to cool down, then the meat will start to release the milk that it absorbed. And then you can no longer ask a guy to taste it for you.
But why would the meat release?
When it starts to cool down, it absorbed milk while it was boiling. And then once it stops boiling and it starts to cool down, it can diffuse milk as well. Because the pores are open because it's cooked. And then just like any steak, when you put it on the plate, juices flow out. So part of that juices is going to be milk.
Okay.
Because it absorbed milk. But this time it's happening inside a pot of milk. So you cannot taste that flavor. The guy can't taste it. But that milk is non-kosher because it was mixed with meat, right?
When you say that it starts to cool down, because
It's rested from its boiling. That's the lashon of Shulchan Aruch. Tenuach ayoyim meraticha. It rested from its boiling. As soon as the meat rests from its boiling, it now starts to
Is there a time
release.
for that? Like we know that
It depends how long it's sitting on the fire. If it's sitting on the fire for an hour, right? You have to take it off the fire and let it stop boiling. And then it'll start to release. Yeah.
Right. So is there a definition for from the time you take it out to the time that
I
it
don't think
officially
so.
starts to?
Depends how hot it would have been. I believe it depends how hot it would have been.
Well, boiling is boiling.
I believe it depends how hot it would have been. Sorry?
I'm gonna talk about what means hot. That's-
But I think it has to wait till it gets to.
But we learned about.
Hold on one second,
what
hold on one
makes
second,
it hot from the previous Siman, right?
Right.
So if it's 18 to 24 minutes, it's
Hold on one
considered
second.
boiling.
No, hot means.
No, but
you
it's
can't
hot.
touch
So
it.
long as it's still making bubbles.
But there's both.
If it's still making bubbles,
It's in,
Okay.
Okay.
it's not just time, it's how long it's making bubbles. So long as it's making bubbles, it's absorbing milk, and as soon as it stops making bubbles, it starts to diffuse. There's your answer. So it's not time on the clock, it depends on each pot. Okay, but if I didn't manage to remove the piece of meat before the boiling stopped, and now there's no longer producing bubbles, so now it's capable of diffusing the very milk that it absorbed. Even if the non-Jew tastes it, and it has no flavor of meat, it's still usher. It's still prohibited because it's not the problem. The meat is not the problem anymore. Now the milk that the meat absorbed is a problem, and that's not distinguishable by taste. And therefore, elam ken yesh b'shishim, and that's when you need 60. Because now you can determine that whatever the milk would have given flavor is nullified by 60. Okay, this is the view of the Shulchan Aruch, that we can rely on a Jew. You can rely on a non-Jew when it's min b'she'enei minoi. When it's one item and a different item, and the flavor is distinguishable, then you can rely on a non-Jew to tell you that the flavor is distinguishable, or that the flavor is discernible or not.
But it only applies when it's still boiling.
In this case, I mean,
It only applies while it's still boiling because that's the only time you have min b'she'enei minoi.
Right.
Once it stops boiling, now you have min b'minoi. You have its kind with itself because you have milk diffusing also. So it's milk diffusing into milk. You can't distinguish it by flavor. And that's what you need, 60 to the ratio.
So long as there's a rapid boil, you can take the piece out. It's only once you remove
And
it
then-
from the pot that
And
you have a
then
problem.
you still need the non-Jew to taste it to see if there's meat flavor.
Right.
Because you took it out before it stopped boiling. So the milk is not a problem because it didn't have time to diffuse the milk that it
There's also
absorbed.
batal b'shishim.
But there still has the meat. No, there's no batal b'shishim here. If it's batal b'shishim, you're not relying on a non-Jew. You're only relying on a non-Jew when there's no batal b'shishim. If there's batal b'shishim, then the 60 already nullifies the flavor. Here you have less than 60, and you want to have the guy tell you that the flavor is not there, right? So if you took it out before it stopped boiling, so you have to have the non-Jew taste it to make sure there's no flavor of meat.
Right.
yeah. But
But once it stopped boiling, now you have a problem of flavor of milk that's non-kosher because the meat absorbed milk and then diffused it. And the non-Jew can taste it from today till tomorrow. He's not going to tell you, well, I know that there's milk here from the meat because milk is milk. And that's what you need 60 to the ratio.
Okay.
Yeah?
Of a piece of meat.
Of the piece of meat. Yeah. Because the milk that it absorbed is not going to be more than the size of the piece of meat. Yeah. Okay. But I look, I'm on Siman Tzaddikas. See later, section 98, where there we're going to discuss the laws b'chlal of how you trust a non-Jew to your question. But what we're going to learn there ain't only Ein anunoig, and us, we in Ashkenaz are not accustomed lismach at'imas goy to rely on a non-Jew's tasting. And we require 60 to the ratio always, even if the non-Jew can tell us that the flavor is no longer distinguishable. We drop that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And according to Rabbi Puska V'Tshuvas here, many Sfardim are stringent about this regard as well, to not rely on the non-Jew, even though the Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch says you can rely on the non-Jew. And ordinarily the Sfardim would follow the Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch itself. Okay, Beis. Now, when it came to Beis, we may remember that there were multiple ways of learning the Shulchan Aruch, because the Shulchan Aruch switches law without telling you how the case switched. Right? And the commentaries themselves discuss which case is being discussed in which paragraph of the Shulchan Aruch. We're going to stick with one way, as we always have, even though the law themselves remain universal, irrespective of how you learn the particulars of the Shulchan Aruch. Namely, there are three possible options here. We're talking about milk that falls into a pot of meat. Three options. Option A, it falls into the mixture of stew. That's going to come at the end of the Siman. It falls into a mixture of stew. Option B, it falls onto a piece of meat that's partially protruding out of the stew. And the question becomes, do I treat that piece that's partially out of the stew as if it's in the stew completely? Or do I treat that piece of meat that's protruding outward as if it's a other piece of meat and it's possible could become chanan? That's case 2. And case 3 is where it falls on a piece of meat that's completely above the line of liquid, right? The liquid only goes halfway up and this piece of meat is above that. And then the question is, can I mix it in fast enough that it doesn't become chanan?
So the third
Follow
case
that?
is a piece of meat that's sitting on a piece of meat that's already protruding.
Right, it's like you have a big stew and the liquid only goes halfway up. So it falls on a piece of meat that's above the liquid.
That's partially protruding.
It's completely above.
Completely protruding is a piece of meat that's sitting on top of a meat.
Right.
Piece of meat.
I'm saying you have a big stew
Yeah.
and the liquid only goes halfway up.
Right.
So there are pieces of meat in the top that are not at all touching the liquid.
They're not touching the liquid.
At all.
Touching other meat.
They're touching other meat.
Yes.
Okay, so it's that piece of meat is faster to become chanan because it doesn't have any other liquid to diffuse the flavor throughout the rest of the pot. And the question is, can it happen fast enough? Where you mix it very quickly or you cover it right away or something like that. So these three cases are what's discussed in this paragraph, in the sif, but it's not clear from the Shulchan Aruch itself which section is discussing which case. So we're going to learn the text itself using one variant of how to understand the text, provided by Vadar, which is taken obviously from the commentaries, but we're using his version. And the laws themselves we discussed other times, and we basically go stringency in every case. Basically, we take the maximum version of stringency in each of these three cases, as we'll explain. Okay, is that clear? Somewhat? Okay, so let's go through it. Nafal chalav l'techetere shel basar. A drop of milk falls into a pot of meat. Now, it fell onto a piece of meat that's partially in the liquid and partially protruding above the liquid. We'll call it the gravy. It's derivative. So it's partially submerged under the gravy and partially protruding above the gravy. So the Shulchan Aruch is of the view that you can rely on a non-Jew. So therefore, you ask the non-Jew to taste the piece of meat onto which the drop of milk fell, which is partially in the mixture and partially below them within the mixture, partially above and partially above. It's partially below and protruding above.
Yeah, that's the case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is
It's the original case of the Mishnah, yeah. Im ein batam chalav, and the non-Jew says, I don't taste any milk on this piece of meat. Hakam mutter, everything is okay, certainly, because according to the Shulchan Aruch, you don't eat 60 to the ratio if the guy determines that there's no flavor of milk, and he did, so no problem. Now, what happens if this piece of meat does have flavor of milk? The guy tastes it and says, I taste milk in here. So, for sure, that piece of meat is definitely forbidden because he can taste milk. Now, Lididan, continues the Rama, in our view, we don't rely on a non-Jew to tell us, determine if the flavor is there or not. I need 60 to the ratio of meat against the milk that's been absorbed in there. So, meat is partially protruding inward, partially above. Drop of milk falls on it. and I determine that the drop of milk is so small and the piece of meat is big enough, there's 60 in the meat against the milk. Then everything is okay, even according to Ramah. Then lav, and if not, I don't have 60 times meat to the amount of milk that fell onto that piece of meat. Asura, that piece of meat is forbidden. All right. Now, what about the rest of the pot? This piece of meat was partially protruding above the line of liquid, and the milk fell on that spot. So does that milk, which fell onto that spot, is that milk to be considered as if it fell into the entire gravy? In which case, I would need 60 in the entire mixture against the drop of milk. Or do I say that piece of milk fell on, that drop of milk only fell onto that meat. It did not fall into the rest of the mixture. And therefore, that piece of meat, which doesn't have 60 to the ratio, or I can taste the milk according to the Shulchan Aruch, that piece of meat is now Hanan. It itself becomes a source of prohibition. And now I need 60 to the ratio in the entire stew against not the drop of milk, but against the entire piece of meat.
And the piece of meat you have to throw away.
And the piece of meat for sure you got to throw away anyway, according to everybody. So the Shulchan Aruch is going to take the stringent view. And therefore he says, we measure the entire stew. If everything that is in the stew, from the other pieces of meat, vayarak and the vegetables, vamarak and the gravy, vatavlan and the spices or the herbs, whatever else is in that mixture. If there is, such that the full piece itself is 60th smaller than the rest of the stew, that piece remains forbidden because it itself became chanan, and I can identify it. We'll get to what happens if I can't identify it, but I could identify it, and therefore that piece is for sure forbidden. Everything else is okay because I have 60 in the entire stew against that piece of meat which became chanan. Now, when is it true that the piece of meat itself remains prohibited because it became chanan? When is that true?
Well, you didn't mix it.
I didn't mix the stew right away. When the milk fell onto that piece of meat, which is partially protruding above the stew line. I only mixed it in later.
Right. So I had time to.
And I didn't cover the pot right away, which would again render the entire mixture as one. Right? So in that case, the piece of meat that's partially protruding upward had time to absorb the milk and thus become chanan. It itself became a source of prohibition. And now I require 60 against the entire piece of meat, and that piece of meat is forbidden. But the Shulchan Aruch here is stringent. Again, a second stringency. If I mix these stew the entire time, from beginning to the end, till it cooled down, I didn't stop mixing it. Or I covered it right when it fell, and it remained covered until it cooled down. Then the entire mixture is what's absorbing the milk. The milk did not have time to be absorbed into that individual piece of meat before it diffuses to the rest of the stew. And therefore that piece of meat did not become chanan. So now the entire stew could be used to nullify not the piece of meat, but the milk that it absorbed. Because now the milk is considered mixed into the entirety of the stew. Because I covered it right away and it remained covered the whole time, or I mixed it right away and it remained mixed the whole time. That piece of meat never had time to become chanan.
This is super helpful when you have a big piece of meat.
It's very helpful when you have a big piece of meat. The Ramaz we're going to learn is going to be more lenient here.
If you have a small piece of meat, then there's no issue. Just throw away that little piece of meat and you'll be fine because you have 60 times the piece of meat.
Yeah.
But if you have a big piece of meat and you know you're not going to have 60 times it, this is very helpful because then you can mix it right away in your whole
Correct.
thing then be.
Correct. Okay, it's machlokes if you can mix it intentionally or not.
Yeah.
There are those who say you can, and there are those who say you can't. So there's this because there's a you can't nullify. You cannot intentionally nullify a prohibition. But if it did, then you apply the rules of nullification. And it's a question of whether or not that applies here or not, and that's a machlokes.
What's the dry halacha for like Ashkenaz?
We don't. As a rule, we're more stringent here. We don't intentionally nullify.
So,
The only case maybe is if it fell into the stew completely, or fell into a piece of meat within the stew, you're not above the stew line, but below the stew line, and you're not sure which piece of meat it is, then you would mix it quickly, right? Because you don't know which piece of meat it is, which means that ice it's anyways nullified,
right.
and you have shishim because in there. So in that case, we'll say you can mix the whole thing together
Right.
as per the Ramah at the end,
The pot.
or cover the pot right away with the same thing.
Right away. She did
Be the same thing.
And then it would be, it will also,
Correct.
the effort would be fine.
Correct, that's for sure, yes.
If
But
the-
here we're saying even the Chatchili could do so in that case, as we'll see at the end of the Ramah.
You do both. Can you mix it for a bit and then cover the pot? So you don't
So,
keep mixing
according-
until the end.
According to Shulchan Aruch, I don't know, combination of the two, I don't know. But according to the Ramaz, we'll learn it doesn't make a difference if you don't have to keep on mixing until the end. As long as you mix it at the beginning, it's enough, right? Okay.
The
Everybody's with
idea
me?
is just to mix in the flavor so that there is no flavor.
Correct, but the Machaber is of the view, no, not that there's no flavor, but the flavor is diffused equally throughout everything.
Right.
And then you have to have 60 in the entire pot
Against it.
against the milk,
Right.
not against the piece that originally absorbed the milk. Because you didn't give that piece of meat time enough to become Hanan. All right. V'chein. My gosh, it's very late already. We're going to have to do another Chazar this week. Okay, V'chein as well, will probably Thursday. V'chein as well, the Ramah. Leniency. Leniency number one. In loy near kadei klal. Loy b'tchila, loy b'soif. You didn't mix the pot at all. Not at the beginning, not at the end. Loy kisa klal. You didn't cover it at all. So we're back to the original case. Piece of meat partially submerged under the stew, partially protruding above. And the drop of milk falls onto the piece of meat that's protruding above. So says the Ramah, as far as I'm concerned, that milk fell into the entire stew.
Okay.
Considering that piece of meat is partially submerged within the liquid, I'm going to treat it as if it fell into the entire stew.
So, yes, yes.
And therefore, therefore, if the entire stew has 60 times the drop of milk, even though you didn't mix it, it only prohibits that piece. And the rest of the mixture is permitted. Now, this itself is quasi a chumrah, because if it's mixed, if I consider it as if it's mixed into the whole entire stew, why should that piece of meat be prohibited?
Yeah.
If it's considered mixed into the entire stew. Okay, we discussed this at length when we learned this. It gets back to the machlokes of the Tosfos and the Rashi.
Yeah.
But be that as it may, this is a bit of a stringency within that view, that the piece of meat nonetheless remains prohibited, even though in theory I'm treating everything as if it's one mixture, and therefore I need 60 into the ratio in the entire stew against the milk, not against the piece of meat. Yes? Okay, so that piece of meat is prohibited, and the rest of the stew is kosher so long as it's 60 against the drop of milk.
Mhm.
Okay, stringency, leniency number one in Rama. Leniency number two, v'chein likewise, im nir b'tchila, if you mixed it right away, or kisa miyad, or you covered it right away. Even though you didn't continue to mix it later, and you didn't continue to cover it later, everything gets considered one big mixture to nullify the milk, and therefore even the original piece of meat would be permitted.
Yeah,
In this case.
yeah.
Yes, because you mixed it right away. So that stringency that I just told you, that even though Miramah, I'm following Ri, Tosfos, which says that that when a piece of meat is partially protruding outward, I treat it as if it's submerged within. And therefore you need 60 the entire pot against the milk. And I told you, says Ramah, that nonetheless I want you to make that meat prohibited. That's only if you didn't mix it right away. If you mix it right away, drop that stringency, everything is kosher.
Right.
Even the piece of meat that the milk fell on, so long as you have 60 the entire stew, and you don't have to keep mixing it the entire time. Mix it right away is good enough, or cover it right away is good enough.
Yeah, yeah.
But this is on condition that you mixed it right when the prohibition hit. Now
You didn't need to mix it thereafter.
they don't mix it thereafter. It almost sounds like, it's not clear, but it almost sounds like from the Ramah that he wants the immediacy of your mixing faster than the immediacy of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says, I want you to mix it from the beginning to the end. Right? And the Ramah says, but make sure you do it right away. As if like the right away he's asking for is faster than the Shulchan Aruch right away.
Right.
I don't know exactly how the seconds are split, but the Ramah wants you to mix it right away or cover it right away, which means it's
So he wants that liquid that's on the meat to be in the liquid of the stew
Right.
instead of staying on the meat.
correct, which means like this. If milk ever falls into your pot, your instinct should be cover. That should be your instinct.
Why not take it out right away?
So no, you can't really take.
You because then you might have to have 60 against the ratio of the piece of meat it fell on.
Let's
If you
say
covered it, you only need 60. That's what you would think to move right away. There's going to be a case we have to move it right away. We'll see soon. But in this case, it might be better to cover it right away because if you remove it, by the time you remove it, you may have already turned that piece of meat into chanan, and now you need 60 in the entire stew against the piece of meat.
Yeah.
According to Shulchan Aruch.
Solution is keeping milk away from the milk.
Unless it fell partially protruding outward
Sorry.
and you're following Ramah, which says that maybe it would be better to move it out right away. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so Shulchan Aruch maybe would be cover it right away. Ramah might say remove it right away.
Cover stir.
Oh, they're all,
Or cover or stir right away.
Yeah.
Sorry?
yeah, because the Ramah is saying it only goes against the drop of milk.
Right, so if I removed it right
60
away,
times the drop.
yeah, you're right. So according to your Ramah, but you
You do-
extract right away. Yeah.
Because though, if you
Even
drop
if
it,
you're-
if
even if you're
if someone's
moving it
getting
later.
nervous, and
You pick it out, you drop it in, I made it even worse.
Exactly, it's gonna.
I made it
get
worse,
worse.
'cause now you have
It's
Hanan
gonna be
Taka.
nervous.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Even
Yeah.
if you remove
It's
it
like-
later, it made no difference. So
Oh.
certainly if you remove
Correct.
it right away, it's all
And the
good.
doctor, that's not right.
What?
You do it.
Okay,
The doctors.
continuing.
They do.
Now comes next case.
Like a one.
Sorry?
You're sticking your hand into a boiling pot of.
Yeah.
Well,
Use
No, you
tongs.
use tongs or a spoon or something. I'm not saying to burn yourself.
Sorry?
No, he's saying you put your hand in it. You wouldn't put your hand in
Right,
it.
oh, so that's the part. If
You
you're using a
take it-
spoon, that could take away time and you don't have your miyad that
Yeah.
the Shulchan Aruch wants.
Yeah.
You're much, well, choose
But then you're
to get the
stirring
cover also would have to be right,
Right.
have to be, okay, so maybe your instinct should be mixed right away. I don't know.
Mix and grab it and pull it out.
What does it mean?
That you could do, mix and then pull it.
Yeah.
Right,
Like-
Immediately,
Immediately.
Like,
How immediate is meat? I don't know.
like reach.
Split seconds, I don't know.
No, so you can reach for a spoon.
Sorry?
So you
Yeah.
so you open the drawer, you
You're
take the
mistaken.
spoon, and then you go in the.
Right, but what also it tells you is if the shy lever comes to you, it's not just a question of how much milk fell in and what else is in the pot. You also have to ask right away, what did you do?
Yeah.
You take the pot off the stove
Right.
and let it cool down. Did you
That's
you
the
mix
worst.
it?
That's the worst.
Did you pour it out? Like, what did you do?
Yeah.
The best thing would be
Right.
to let it boil, grab it while it's boiling.
You have to mix it though, according to the Shulchan.
But when you're putting a piece inside, when you're grabbing
That's
a
considered
ladle or
mixing?
something, as soon as you if you follow the rules of what we do on Shabbos,
That's considered mixing? I don't know.
that
Maybe
we don't take the cholent off the pot because
that's
it's
that's a
considered
chumrah
mixing.
for Shabbat. Would we
Ah,
say that also lakula? I don't know.
Mhm.
Maybe.
Mhm.
Would we say that because we treat scooping out on Shabbos, we as an Ashkenazim, treat scooping out as if it's cooking on Shabbos because you're mixing, or at least it looks like it's cooking. Mexican mavashal. It's not mamish mavashal, it's Mexican mavashal. It looks like it's cooking.
Right.
And I'm gonna apply that leniency also here.
No.
I doubt it.
No.
Right? Okay, let's go further. Now comes the next case, which again the Shulchan Aruch doesn't identify that this is a new case, but we're going to identify it that way. The Chen likewise, he actually does identify it, but anyway, the Chen not follow Toich but there's a dispute here. I have to learn this. If the milk fell into the entire stew, so it fell into the liquid part, or it fell onto piece of meat, which we're going to learn are submerged in the stew. And I don't know which piece of meat it fell onto. Because if I knew,
Remove it.
I have to remove that piece of meat.
Mhm.
Even if everything is nullifying it and the milk is not diffused throughout the rest of the stew, and therefore it would be the rest of the stew would be kosher. But if I know which piece of meat it fell onto, even if it's submerged under the stew, I still have to remove it.
Even what if you mix it right away?
Oh, let's get that in a second.
Oh.
Get that in a second. But if I know where it fell, I have to remove that piece of meat that's submerged under the stew.
Yeah.
But in this case, I don't know which piece of meat it fell onto. But it fell onto a piece of meat for sure, and that piece of meat was submerged inside the stew completely. So then, says the Shulchan Aruch, go mix it. Here it sounds like it's not if you mixed it. In the previous case, it said if you mix it. Here he says, go mix it.
Yeah, yeah. Because it's different, right? Because we're saying if it's all together.
'Cause it's in the stew.
It's in this, yeah.
Because it's in the stew. And it's only a question of not knowing which piece of meat it is. So mix it all. That way that piece of meat never gets anything extra.
Yeah.
Never gets extra flavor.
As long as you have shisha, right? If you don't have shisha, then.
That's right. Achiyashim we about call. It's not such that it's mixed all together.
Yeah.
He doesn't say you have to mix it from beginning to end. He says mix it. And the Ramah is going to tell us mix it right away. Mix it such that the flavor is equally diffused everywhere. Then ask the non-Jew to taste it. According to Mechaber, you can do that. And he'll tell you if there's milk flavor throughout the stew. Sooner than it's forbidden. From lav. And if the guy says, "I'm sorry, I can't taste any milk," well, tell us everything is fine. Even the piece of meat that absorbed the milk initially, because A, you don't know which meat it is, and B, you prevented it from getting any extra flavor because you mixed it, according to them all right away, you mixed it so that the milk diffuses equally throughout everywhere. If you can't find a guy to taste for you, then of course, you can't find a guy that you can adequately trust as per the rules of Tzaddik.
Yeah.
Then you measure it 60 to the ratio of the drop of milk, which Ramah would say you do that anyway. Okay, now comes the Ramah. Now, the case of the Ramah, this is where the discussion comes. We mentioned this when we first learned it, because the Ramah seems to be talking about a new case now.
Yeah.
Even though he presents himself as if he's arguing with the Shulchan Aruch, but in reality, it's really a new case he's presenting, at least in one reading. Yesh Chalken. Others disagree. The Sfirlu, and they're of the view that if the piece of meat was above the line of liquid, so it's you have this big stew, the piece of meat's on top, and your liquid only goes halfway up. So between the top of the liquid and the bottom of your piece of meat and the top, there's other pieces of meat or vegetables that are holding it above the line of liquid. And now the milk fell on that. Then, mixing the pots not going to help you. Because that piece on top becomes chanan. Because that's submerged partially in. That would make me, Ramah, say that it's considered mixed into the stew. Yeah? And therefore, unless it was mixed right away. Now, in this case, it's not clear. Is that Ramah saying, please go ahead and mix it right away?
No, I don't think so.
Doesn't seem like that. If you mixed it, does he disagree with the Shulchan Aruch previously, which said that if the piece of meat, if this milk fell onto the stew, and it fell into a piece of meat that's in the stew, he agreed you can mix it right away? That you should go ahead and mix it? Well, why not? If the case he's talking about here is a piece of meat that's above, which means it's not the same case as the Shulchan Aruch earlier, then maybe he'll agree, go ahead and mix it right away.
In the other case where it's like partially.
Maybe even he'll agree when it's partially.
Maybe yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe when it's partially, he'll say, go ahead and mix it right away.
Right.
Not clear, machlekes.
Yeah.
Right?
So we're learning
I think
over
he's
here
saying,
that
but
it's a piece on top of a piece.
Correct.
If,
Or
if
on top
he's
vegetable,
saying
whatever.
on top of the piece should be mixed right away.
Chaber did
Say it.
not mention it that way. We
Correct.
not translate.
That's what I'm saying. The Shulchan Aruch,
So it's a
the Shulchan Aruch
totally-
switches case.
And we're
Correct.
making a different case.
If you read this way, there's a different way to learn the Shulchan Aruch.
Uh-huh.
You can learn the Shulchan Aruch that when it says that it fell on a piece of meat, it's actually talking about a piece of meat that's above
Right.
and not
Which wouldn't
within.
make sense because that would disagree with the Ramah above. where
Yes,
he
but it would.
said-
But then it would
where he said
mean.
it's not that case and you didn't need to mix it at all.
So the upside of
That's why
learning.
you're learning it. You have to learn this as a
Correct.
different case.
The upside of learning it,
Otherwise, you'd say Ramah is contradicting himself.
not contradicting himself, it's just introducing a new
If you
case.
didn't learn it like as a different case, you would say the Ramah was
Yes, correct.
contradicting himself.
Correct.
That's why you come to learn this as a different case.
Correct. But the problem is, he says yesh chalken, others disagree. Who's disagreeing with him? We're talking about a different case.
Yeah.
Right, which means that we're going to have to say the Shulchan Aruch, when he says if it fell into the stew, that's case one, or it fell into a piece of meat that you don't know which one it is, he's not talking about the piece of meat that's in the stew, but piece of meat that's above the stew.
Yeah.
Which means the Shulchan Aruch takes two extremes and makes it one case. One where it fell into the stew, and one where it fell into a piece that's above the stew. And then both have the same law that you can mix it right away. Or not just you could. You should mix it right away.
Yeah.
That would be an extreme leniency on the Mechaber's part, just to make it consistent with the Ramah who's arguing with him.
Mhm.
Right? So that's why it's a little tricky. So the common way of reading is it's actually two different cases.
So there's a little dalit over here for Yesh Chalkim.
Yeah.
Where does that dalit go to?
That dalet goes to, is it the Paz? Who is it? Let's see.
Sorry.
The dalet.
There's
I don't know dalit.
There's no dalit.
Is it-
Yeah.
I
Yesh Chalkim, there's a dalit right toward the above, a little dalit.
Oh, yeah, Tor. Yeah, he says
The
Tor.
Tor.
Yeah, Tor.
Oh, that's the source.
Oh.
Just source, doesn't give commentary. The commentary is going to be on the in Shach Ches, which you probably have, which you should
I
have.
see.
Yeah, okay.
See Shach Ches there?
Yeah.
See?
What does it read there? Read it out loud for me.
The
please.
Rambam allows mixing the pot in a case when the piece which the milk fell on is not known as a matter of course. His reason being that giving that this is a case of doubt, it cannot be considered an avela.
Even if it's above the line of liquid.
Okay. Says the 30 degrees.
Sorry? The tortoise agrees. Sorry?
It's part of the same thing.
And the tortoise agrees. Right? So that's the two ways of learning the Shulchan Aruch.
Hmm.
Follow? Yeah?
But if you learn,
Yeah?
if you learn that if a piece of meat sitting on top of another piece of meat has a drop of milk on it, and you're supposed to mix it right away, wouldn't you for sure then know if it's half sticking out that you mix it right away, or if it fell into the pot? Because that's the farthest version.
Hold on a second. The question is, it's the reverse. The question is, do you even have to mix it? If it fell onto a piece that's below the line, do I even have to mix it, B'chlal?
Right.
Right? That would be the machlek. That would be the
Ramah said
question.
above you don't. The Ramah
Sorry?
said you don't.
The Ramah would say you may not have to. No,
No, he says, there are more over here, right here.
it says you don't.
He says you don't have to mix.
Correct,
it
correct,
up.
correct, correct.
You
Yeah.
just take away the piece. And that that's only a stringency.
You have to take it. You have to take it away.
Having the
Right.
drop on
Correct.
the piece that's above the liquid is like having it in the liquid.
Mhm.
And you don't need to mix it. But as a stringency, we'll remove the piece.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe you just want to do.
Again, so the Shach, yes, that's correct. The Shach also says that we're learning in the Ramah that it's above the line also, and you can still mix it.
Maybe
Right? Sorry?
we can do Gimel because Gimel kind of.
Which Gimel? Shiv Gimel, yes, let's do Shiv Gimel.
Because it kind of talked about.
Yeah. Okay, Daled is another sugi, I suppose. Let's learn Gimel, yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the time?
Yeah, it's almost up.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, Gimel. We have to do another Chazar later this week. Gimel. Kishnesa chaticha machmas hachalav. Whenever a piece of meat. Okay, so let's just recap in our heads quickly. The end is that in all three of these cases we go stringent. Right? So let me give you all of that. Even though we went through it when we learned it the first time. Let's go through it. If sorry?
Later.
Gimel?
Okay, let's do Gimel, and then maybe when we start next Chazar, we'll go through the three cases. Okay. When the piece becomes prohibited because of the milk that it absorbed. All the other the entire piece now becomes prohibited. This is the essence of Chanan. And therefore, if that piece of meat was later cooked with others, you need 60 against the entire piece of meat, not just the milk that it absorbed. And if you can identify which piece of meat it was that originally absorbed the milk that's now mixed into your stew, you got to throw it out. Everything else is permitted, so long as you have 60 against the piece of meat, not just the milk that was absorbed, because you have chanan. Now, if you don't know which piece of meat it was, but the stew definitely has 60 times the ratio of that piece of meat,
Yeah.
then the entire stew is permitted. But any piece of meat that could possibly be the one that absorbed the milk is prohibited. If the piece that it prohibited was something worthy of note, worthy of serving, which we're going to get to. So let's have two cases then. You're making a Chinese stir fry, which all the pieces of meat are small little slivers.
Yeah.
Right? And the milk fell into one of the pieces of meat that was outside the mixture. It wasn't mixed as per Rambam and as per the Mechaber, and therefore it became Chanan. And now it's mixed into the rest of these stew. You can't identify it. There's 60 to the ratio of that little sliver of meat because it's a big Chinese stew, and everything's fine. Even that piece of meat. You don't know where it is? It's all good. Yeah? If, same scenario, now you're not making a stew of Chinese chicken, which is small slivers, you're making a stew with minute steaks, which are much bigger pieces.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that piece of meat became chanan because you didn't mix it fast enough.
Yeah.
And now it's mixed into the rest of your stew. Right? So now, that piece of meat and any other piece of meat. So first of all, you have to have 60 to the ratio of the biggest of those pieces of meat. So yeah, let's say you have three minutes. Let's say you have 3 minute steaks and a bunch of other small slivers. So the small slivers of meat, keep those because it wasn't those that had the milk, right? So you have to have 60 to the ratio of the biggest of your 3 minute steaks because there's one of those three that absorbed the milk. A, B, you got to remove all those minute steaks because all those could possibly be the one that's chanan.
And it's something fit to be served.
It's really liskah, but it's worthy of note.
Right.
But you can't do like one within two, like
No, because it's
That's only biblically we do one within two.
Yeah.
Biblically, we do one within two is nullified. But rabbinically, we only apply that when it's not royal liskabed. When it's royal liskabed, it's worthy of note. We don't apply the biblical standard of 1 and 3. And thus,
And even
any of the pieces that could possibly be the one that absorbed that are royal liskabed, that are worthy of note, have to be removed. And you have to take 60 against the ratio of the biggest one. Because maybe that's the one that became chanan.
right. So then your whole pot could be treif or not.
As long as you have 60 in your stew against the biggest one, you're fine.
Huge stew
Exactly.
with 3 steaks.
In other words,
you know,
you don't have to have 60 against all 3 steaks.
Right.
Because not all 3 that became chanan.
the biggest
It's
one.
only one of the 3 that became chanan. So maybe it's the biggest one. So as long as you have 60 in the rest against that biggest one, remove all 3 of them. The rest of your stew is okay.
Could
there?
imagine that a thing like this, a case would be very rare, in such a.
Most of these cases are very rare. If you keep it in a kosher kitchen, that don't happen. The more common cases, we're going to learn much later, but they're the ones that are the most lenient. Is I used the wrong spoon for the wrong stew. I cleaned it in the wrong sink. I mixed this chicken soup with the wrong ladle.
Right.
It's usually the cases that come up.
I'm saying about this because the Hatika Royal Iskabe is something that has to be something that could be served on its own, like you said, a minute steak. So 60 times a minute steak is some huge quantity. It's a huge-
Oh, that's why it's rare.
I'm
Yes,
saying you had to cook something so huge, and there were like 3 steaks.
you're a
on top.
caterer. You're a caterer.
Yeah.
And you have 20 steaks in.
Yeah,
You have 20 steaks in there.
caterer,
Now you got to throw out all the 20 steaks.
But a
caterer wouldn't have any challah b'chlal in his place if he's a meat caterer.
No. But
Uh,
if you had 20
In
steaks,
America,
the
you have these
likelihood,
things, not
Huh?
the likelihood you had 60 times one of those steaks is
Is a
very
lot.
small.
which
Yeah.
Because
which
you put a lot of
beef
steak
caterer
there,
has
so, you know.
milk in their kitchen.
Fair enough.
we're not talking about.
Okay, so let's remain in touch, and God willing, maybe on Thursday we'll continue this Siman. Okay, wonderful weekend, buddy. Good luck. I'm gonna reach out again. I'll reach out to them. We'll fix it up.
It's not the